With that, I'd like to go ahead and begin. This is the ACJC webinar on justice counts in Arizona. I'd like to introduce the following representatives. We have at ACJC our Executive Director, Andrew Lefevre, Senior Policy Advisor with the Bureau of Justice Assistance, Jeff Locke, Senior Policy Analyst with the Council of State Governments Justice Center, Sarah Lee. And those three will be providing us an intro leading into the presentations here today for justice counts. So with that, Director Lefevre, if you'd like to take it over and provide opening remarks, and then we'll go from there.
Sure, thanks, Matt. And it's always a dangerous proposition to turn it over to the director of an agency for introductions, but I'll do my best. Appreciate everybody's time this morning that's jumped on the call, and great to see friends of ours from back in DC, Sarah and Jeff from BJA and Council for State Governments. As always, appreciate this partnership with you all. As everybody knows, we've been having a conversation here in Arizona for the last couple of years. ACJC has been one of the drivers of that conversation around what can we do to get better criminal justice data available so that policymakers and the public can make better decisions off of that data, and how best to direct resources and ask the right questions of their policymakers on what's going on in our criminal justice system. We've been advocating and advancing at the legislature proposals that make that more likely for us to do. 2 years ago, ACJC was designated as the central collection point for criminal justice aid data for the state. And this last session, we had put forward a bill that would operationalize a data collection system for the statewide collection of data. Ultimately, that did not pass. It was vetoed by the governor for some political reasons. But very pleased that in parallel to the work that we've been doing in Arizona, specifically on our own data collection efforts, that we've been part of this more national conversation that Justice Counts represents. As a little bit of history, ACJC's former chairperson, Sheila Polk, the Yavapai County attorney, actually sat on the National Steering Committee for Justice Counts and was very responsible for helping to put together metrics that we'll talk about later on in the prosecutors area specifically, but looking at all of the data metrics that are being discussed today. So we're very pleased that Arizona was chosen as one of the pilot states for this Justice Counts initiative, because we view this very much as a continuation and an enhancement of the conversation that we've already been having here in Arizona about how do we go about collecting criminal justice data in a more transparent and cohesive fashion. So for us, this is just a great way to continue the conversation with you all, to have some resources available to go out and help you better understand what can be done with criminal justice data that you may have your own, but what can we do if we were able to look across counties, or not even counties? What can we do if we can look across states with certain criminal justice elements? So with that, I'm very pleased to support as best we can ACJC's efforts in this area, and I look forward to hearing the remarks of both Jeff and Sarah, and then letting you hear from our staff about kind of the plan we have in place moving forward, and whatever we can do to help make that a reality for you, we're happy to do. So with that, I've kept it to under 5 minutes, which is a miracle sometimes, and if you give me the microphone. But Matt, I'll turn it over. I'm not sure who you want to have go next, whether that's Jeff or Sarah.
Thank you, Andy. We can hand that over to Jeff if you'd like to go ahead.
Great. Matt, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Director. Thanks so much for the opportunity to participate in today's webinar and briefing for officials in Arizona. Again, my name is Jeff Locke. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor at the Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Assistance, or BJA, where I serve on the Corrections, Reentry, and Justice Reform team within our policy office. And this team is led by Dr. Heather Tubman Carbone, Associate Deputy Director within the policy office, and who is also participating in today's conversation. I'll be really brief. I just want to make 3 quick points with my welcome. First, supported by BJA, Justice Counts is a cross-system, consensus-based project that is by the field and for the field. For those of you unfamiliar with BJA, we strive to help and partner with state, local, and tribal agencies to meet the challenges of the field. We do so through 4 major actions. We fund, we educate, we equip, and we partner. And secondly, we're using these 4 major actions with Justice Counts to build on data work that has already started in the field in states like Arizona, and is meant to help tell the agencies, it's meant to help tell the stories that the agencies that you yourselves are undertaking. We know there's great work going on, and we want to help tell those stories, but we recognize that policymakers are often forced to make critical decisions about the safety of their constituents using limited, outdated, or inconsistent data. We also know that the justice system should be built upon the principles of fairness, effectiveness, and efficiency. But if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And we know that policymakers and the public need better data in order to advance these principles, which Director Lefebvre indicated in his remarks. And just finally, we're really excited to partner with the Arizona Criminal Justice Commission, Director Lefebvre, and the entire ACJC team as they lead the work of implementing Justice Counts in your respective state. We're here to support these efforts, and again, look forward to working with you all moving forward. So I'll stop there and turn it back to Matt and Sarah.
Thank you, Jeff. We appreciate all the support from BJA in this effort. Sarah, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. Thank you, Matt, Shayla, Jeff, and Andy. It's really nice to be here, and we are so excited at the Council of State Governments to be working with ACJC on this Justice Counts effort. It's been, in the works at the Council of State Governments Justice Center for a while, but we're just now, in the past several months, starting the work of implementing it across several states, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. And we're really excited to see where ACJC takes Justice Counts and helps to lead the way for improving and increasing the amount of criminal justice data that is available in Arizona. Matt, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say, or else I'll just dive into the presentation.
Sarah, I think that's great. And I just wanted to note to everybody that the agenda was provided in the blast email out to everyone. So if you want to follow along with the agenda, Sarah's going to start up. She's going to queue up her presentation here right now as we see. But if you want to follow along and just see the points that we're hitting throughout this hour, please feel free to download that agenda that is available online. And we'll continue forward. Thank you, Sarah.
Yes, so I think, Andy and Jeff and Matt and everyone have already alluded to what Justice Counts is about, but I'll just give a quick overview presentation so we can sort of frame the conversation for today. Justice Counts is a national initiative. We're trying to really build a community around criminal justice data to make it more accessible for the public, to make it more usable for policymakers, and to support agencies in, as Jeff was saying, telling the story of their work and their data. So the problem that Justice Counts is trying to address is really about the lack of timely and actionable criminal justice data that is available to the public. Everyone on this call here working in agencies knows that you already have a lot of data, whether it's in your systems, in your reports, but it's often not easily accessible to the public, whether it's not reported regularly enough, or it's, found somewhere in a report that you have to scroll through 6 pages to get to. For whatever reason, it's often hard to find actionable data that is timely and that is useful for policymakers, and then to link that data across different systems within the criminal justice system, right? So there have previously been, we know of a lot of other national data efforts, but they're frequently focused on only one part of the criminal justice system. And what's really one of the exciting things about Justice Counts is that we are proposing ways to bring data together from across different parts of the criminal justice system, from across jurisdictions, from counties, from across states, to have it in one place to give people a better understanding of how populations and trends move through these systems. So while this project is co-led by the Bureau of Justice Assistance and the Council of State Governments Justice Center, we also have several other national organizations who are joining us to do this work. These include professional associations from across the system, as well as research and technology organizations. And we're also led by a national steering committee of leaders from across the systems and states who have all joined in to provide support, thought leadership, and support to the project. And this is our national steering committee who gives us that guidance and leadership. And so there are 4 real ways that Justice Counts is trying to address the problems that I previously mentioned. The first of those is through cross-system consensus-based metrics. And I'll talk a little bit more about what those metrics are in a minute. But the headline is really that these are data points across the criminal justice system that we feel like if they were available in a regular way to policymakers and the public would be able to help them understand the function of the criminal justice system better. And they would also, we hope that these are the ones that are the most feasible for agencies to be able to share on that regular basis. In addition, we're also working with our technology partner, Recidiviz, to build several tools that we will be making available for free to agencies who choose to participate to allow them to do that data sharing in a way that is easy and meets them wherever their technological capabilities are. A lot of those tools will be able to create really interesting data visualizations and customized reports that, again, we will hope to be able to allow agencies to tell their stories, that will allow policymakers to be able to use to understand how agencies are functioning, and then also to give the public an understanding of the way systems are interacting and functioning across jurisdictions and states. And lastly, we're providing technical assistance to people who sign on, to the agencies that sign on to Justice Count. So that in Arizona is going to mean we're providing support to ACJC to allow them to lead this initiative. And that technical assistance is going to look like a lot of other things that I will talk about in a minute. So as I mentioned, we have this first set of tier 1 metrics, and these are data points that, again, across all the different sectors and categories, we feel should be the most feasible for agencies to be able to share and the most useful for policymakers to be able to know on a timely basis. These were selected by subcommittees around each of the 7 sectors running along the left-hand side through hundreds of hours of conversations and votes. And these that you see on your screen here are just the top line metrics. So I'll talk a little bit about the way that agencies are going to be able to customize the definitions that go along with each of these metrics through the technology system that we're building. And again, you can reference all of this on our website as well, so don't feel like you need to write anything down or memorize it in this moment. But the metrics are really the heart of the project right now, and they are currently being implemented in a lot of the Justice Count states that have signed on. We're in sort of a pilot period right now, so we hope that these will continue to be built upon and they will be reactive to feedback in the future. But these are the tier 1 metrics that are built into our technology data sharing system. And so I mentioned Recidiviz is our technology partner that's working with us to build Justice Counts Publisher, which is the tool that we are providing to any agencies that want to sign on that can sit alongside any data systems that an agency already has to allow them to do that data sharing. Again, there's a lot of different ways should an agency decide to participate in Justice Counts that will allow them to do that data sharing, whether it's manual data entry, bulk upload. We're working on API solutions with different vendors to allow for a really seamless transition of data from your system into Justice Counts Publisher. And the other really exciting thing about the system is it really allows for a lot of customization as well. So for example, one of the metrics that was on the screen previously was staff for any agency, meaning the number of staff that an agency has. But we also know that saying staff is not as simple as saying just staff, right? That could mean a lot of different things. So the system and our definitions allow an agency to customize when they are reporting a staff number. What does that mean? Does that include only full-time employees? Does that also include part-time employees or interns? And the system has, customization settings that allows each agency to define what their numbers mean. And then for agencies that can go beyond that top line metric, you would also be able to tell us within that staff number, how many of those are administrative staff? How many of those are officers in the field, for example? How many of those are management staff? So there are breakdowns available as well to give more context to that data. And again, that customization and flexibility should make things much simpler and easier for agencies to be able to participate. So where is Justice Counts being implemented? You can see Arizona on that map. We have a couple of different ways that Justice Counts is being implemented across the country. So we have states such as Arizona that received financial support from BJA to do that implementation. And in those states, the agency that received the grant from BJA is taking the lead on implementation. So ACJC will be the lead implementation agency in Arizona with support from the Council of State Governments Justice Center. And then in our founding states, which are those orange states that you see on the screen, In that case, the lead on implementation is the Council of State Governments. We were invited into those places by an agency in the state, and we're taking the lead on doing technical assistance. So it's a slightly different model to technical assistance, but we're working, in all of those different states, basically to achieve the same outcome, which is to have as many agencies as possible across those states sharing data through Justice Counts Publisher with policymakers and the public. And then lastly, in those blue states, those are what we call alpha tester sites, meaning there were agencies within those sites that agreed over a year ago to work with us to help build out the technology and work through those initial issues and use for the publisher. So I talked a little bit about the technical assistance that we're providing in states that have signed on to Justice Counts, such as Arizona. And so all of these tasks that you see listed on the screen are things that Council of State Governments Justice Center and BJA will work with ACJC to build out and figure out, what is the model that's going to work best for Arizona in terms of implementing Justice Counts. So we'll be working to support agencies in adopting the metrics through a number of different ways. And then once those metrics start to be adopted and shared publicly in Arizona, we'll also be working to help educate the public and policymakers about what this data means. Because as I mentioned at the top of the presentation, we don't want policymakers making decisions based on stale data, based on anecdote. We want them to be able to, understand the data that they're seeing through Justice Counts and make it actionable for them. So with that, I'm going to stop and turn it back over to Matt and Shayla to talk a little bit about how they see implementation going in Arizona.
Thank you, Sarah. Let me pull up our presentation here really quickly. And again, anyone that has questions or comments, feel free to enter that into the chat feature on Google Meet. So you are welcome to absolutely do so. Shayla will be monitoring that. So if there are questions, she will interrupt me and let me know, and we can try to field those questions that you may have. So Shayla and I will be talking a little bit now about ACJC's role in Justice Counts, specifically within Arizona. Shayla will talk more about the role portion. I'm going to talk about what got us to Justice Counts, and also a little bit of detail about how we'll be collecting that information directly from the agencies. So moving into historically, ACJC has always received questions from stakeholders, from legislature, from our own commissioners on our board, as well as the general public. And these are complex criminal justice questions quite often. So complex that we just don't always have the data available to us to answer those questions, or be quite cumbersome in order to do so. With that in mind, we're always trying to seek solutions on how to gain access to data and information that we don't already have in order to answer those questions, those critical questions for program implementation, for just understanding about the general functions and processes of our justice system. So that's really what led us into our Senate Bill 1588 effort, which many of you were participating in that effort directly with us at ACJC. Many of you already know what this Senate bill is about, but just for those that may not be aware, it's that central collection point for criminal justice information. So we'd identify a central repository in which to support all that data and information that we are able to collect, both currently collected and readily reportable, typically electronically within your management systems at your agency. So that might include your records management systems, that would include your case management systems at your agencies, law enforcement, prosecution, courts, corrections, probation, all the way through that process. We would securely store that in our environment in that central location, and then provide that information at an aggregate level out to all of you to limit any release of any personally identifiable information, as well as entity identifying information. But as Director Lefevre mentioned, Senate Bill 1588 was vetoed by the governor. So our attention has shifted now to looking at Justice Counts and how Justice Counts can help us in that effort. They both align very similarly. So it made sense for us to work both hand in hand on the two data collection efforts. And so with that shift to Justice Counts, we identify some of the unique qualities of Justice Counts, being that it is in benefit a national initiative. We see other states that are jumping on board. We're able to work with those states in Arizona alike to try to identify many of the issues and the data that we need to address in order to answer the questions that we have. But we do recognize also that it is a voluntary submission process. So agencies that jump on board, it is through voluntary participation, where Senate Bill 1588 was more of a mandatory requirement as part of the legislation. The aggregate format of the data, that is how Justice Counts would receive that information, but not necessarily how we have to do it here in Arizona. And I'll show you a couple ways in which we're proposing to collect that information from the agencies that might assist in other ways for us to work directly with agencies with more granular data to answer those questions of greatest interest for those jurisdictions. And then also Justice Counts targets specific key performance indicators, as we saw in the Tier 1 metrics. Those specific indicators are the focus initially of Justice Counts, and we'll see where we go from there. But it is a little different from what we were asking for in the Senate Bill 1588. Just wanted to make comment that we are receiving a federal award from the Bureau of Justice Assistance to participate in Justice Counts. We're looking at using those funds to facilitate the participation of agencies across the entire state of Arizona. So we will be reaching out. We'll be working with counties as a whole to try to onboard through phases. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end with the participation discussion. And as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at multiple ways to collect this information within the state of Arizona for those Tier 1 data metrics. And on this next slide, I'll just walk through those two options that we've identified here at ACJC. So what we want to do, the first option here, option 1, is very similar to what we were proposing for Senate Bill 1588. And for those agencies that would work with us to feed information either directly from their records management systems or their case management systems, we'd be able to feed that information, that granular information, directly into ACJC's secure environment, alleviating the pain on the agencies themselves to having to aggregate that data each and every time that we're collecting that. Let's say we're on a cadence of monthly, quarterly, annually. That burden would fall on ACJC to then aggregate that data and then provide that directly to Justice Counts. That is our preferred method, is option 1. But we also provide option 2 as a manual entry of aggregated data into the ACJC reporting tool, and thus we push that information directly off to Justice Counts. So there are these two options. The second one comes with a little bit more of the burden on the agency to run that aggregated level data and supply that over to ACJC as a result. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Shayla Gilliland. She is our Justice Counts coordinator, and she's going to walk us through the ACJC roles with regard to Justice Counts in Arizona.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Sarah, for that brief introduction of what Justice Counts, the initiative, is. So our role at ACJC is really to lead this effort in Arizona. We're working right now to determine what the best approach is for successful implementation here in our state. But ultimately, I think we want to engage and facilitate participation with local agencies and counties. So additionally, we will act as that kind of data collection channel. As Matt just alluded to, there will be two options to submit your data to ACJC, either by a direct feed. Again, Matt mentioned this kind of takes the burden off the agencies to manually submit that information. So that would be our preferred method, but we also want to allow for that manual upload of data as well. Then we will vet that information and push that information directly to Justice Counts for publication on Arizona's behalf. And then finally, we will be offering training and technical assistance through the support from BJA and CSG throughout this effort. So our hope is really to connect with local agencies, work to make this initiative work as best for Arizona as possible at that local or county level. And as Sarah briefly mentioned, the technical assistance aspect may look a little different based on individual agencies or county level needs, but that could be things such as identifying what metrics you want to share, how do you define your data, tracking that data and information, developing a data strategy. So really, it may look a little different based on each county's needs, but that ultimately will be kind of the role of ACJC in terms of training and technical assistance, how to use metrics, all of that good stuff. Sarah already went through these tier 1 metrics, but we thought it might be appropriate just to share those again. And then finally, we will be targeting these criminal justice sectors. So we will be looking for partnerships with law enforcement, prosecutors and defense. We have courts and pretrial, probation, and then our prisons and jails.
And at this point, Shayla, I think we'll move over back over to Sarah. If you wanted to talk about some of the benefits of participation, I'll go ahead and take the slide deck off. We have one more slide that we'll show at the end with regard to participation and what the next steps will be with ACJC moving forward. But I think at this point might be really good for us to address those benefits to the agencies with their chosen participation.
Thanks, Matt. I'm going to pull the deck back up. Okay. So I think at some points when we have this conversation, it starts to feel a little bit abstract what we're talking about. So what we wanted to do is give a few examples of how we envision the aggregate level data being shared around those tier 1 metrics could be useful to agencies, to policymakers, and to the public. So I'm just going to run through a few examples of how we see or how we envision the metrics being used. So in example 1 is, how could agencies use justice counts to advocate for funding that they may need to meet their public safety priorities? So let's say an agency had available to it data around the expenses metric, and specifically, they break down for personnel, meaning they knew how much they were spending as an agency on their personnel costs. And let's say they also had access to the high-level staffing metric. So they would be able to know in that agency how many people are currently on staff. Putting that together with knowing the number of vacancies that an agency would have, they would be able to show how much they spend on average on a staff member. They would be able to compare it to other agencies, whether it's across states or within a state, and be able to show the difference between vacancy rates. And they would say, they'd be able to more effectively make a case when talking to a policymaker about why they need increased funding in order to raise salaries to recruit and retain staff that they need. So I think, we've been having conversations, like I said, with agencies across the country, and I know staffing is a huge concern across the field. And so having this data at hand would be able to really support the case an agency wants to make in order to increase the amount that they're paying their staff. Second example, how could a law enforcement agency or the public use the Justice Counts metrics to understand, gain insights on the quality of arrests in their jurisdiction? So if they had data on the law enforcement metric for arrests, being able to combine that with the prosecution metric for the numbers of cases referred, declined, or diverted. So those are all different metrics within the prosecution sector. That will be able to tell them, well, we've had this many arrests that have increased in the past several months. And we see that the number of cases referred to prosecutors from law enforcement has similarly increased. However, the prosecution has chosen or declined to prosecute, significantly, which indicates something that is happening between that law enforcement and prosecution function in terms of either the quality of the cases that are being brought or the ability of a prosecution office to handle the cases in some way. And so this is really meant to be the start of a conversation between policymakers and agencies to get to the root of that problem, right? I mean, these aggregate level numbers aren't going to be able to tell you what that issue or problem may be, but it's a way to say there's something going on here and we need to learn more. And so these metrics can start that kind of conversation in a way that if you didn't have that data previously, you wouldn't be able to know where to look or how to support an argument. So lastly, let's say a legislature is hypothesizing that people on parole are responsible for violent crime and is considering eliminating parole because of that. how would justice counts help a policymaker to evaluate that approach or help an agency to make a case for or against such a policy? So if there was access to the community supervision metric around revocations, in addition to knowing how many people in general are on community supervision, specifically parole, you'd be able to combine that with the metric for prison admissions. And you start to see some interesting things come to light. So we'd see that, you know, of the 420 people revoked to prison in the last year, however, most people on parole were in fact succeeding, and that 425 represents a small percentage of the parole population, with it being, you know, less than 10% of admissions to prison. And so we're seeing that, in fact, you know, whether there is an increase in crime, it's not being driven by the parole population. So getting rid of parole would not be changing the number of people who are being imprisoned for violent crimes in the state. Again, the justice counts metrics are really meant to be the start of a conversation, right? When you're talking about aggregate level data, you're never going to be able to know, you know, look at a specific case or a specific incident, but it's going to be able to tell you how systems are functioning, how populations are moving, and start to tell some stories about what is happening at the agency level to allow agencies to really tell the story of the work that they're doing. One last example, let's say a legislature passed a bill requiring a pretrial risk assessment to reduce the number of people held in jail before trial. How could you help measure the impact of that policy? If you had the number of pretrial releases in a jurisdiction combined with the number of pre-adjudication admissions to a jail and the number of people in a jail that are awaiting trial or pre-adjudication, you'd be able to see that, you know, a year after that bill is implemented, admissions have increased slightly, but generally the number of people pre-adjudication is remaining steady. There were some slight changes with more people being released. So there may be some impact from pretrial risk, but it would be really hard to say without having more data, you know, that this was something that needed more investigation and was having the effect that they were interested in. So again, we see the value in aggregate level data and starting conversations for agencies. And I think that's the end of my slides. So I will stop sharing and turn it back over to Matt and Shayla. But thank you guys so much. It's really exciting to be able to talk about justice counts with all of you.
Thank you, Sarah. And yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I think it really is a great opportunity to review that aggregate level data and what it can tell us across Arizona. If option one were selected by your agency for sharing, we would have that additional granular detail at ACJC, direct feed from, let's say, a management system. And ACJC could work with your agency to drill a little bit further and understand with a little bit more clarity exactly what might be going on within your communities. So we had a discussion yesterday with a task force on that very issue, and that could definitely be a service that ACJC could offer if negotiating with your agency, if you're participating in justice counts. So something to keep in mind that we can possibly leverage resources here in different ways through the justice counts effort to also provide even more granular detail at ACJC. I'm going to go ahead and jump into participation and next steps for those that are interested in participating in this effort. Just give you a sneak peek of what we're going to be doing at ACJC. Obviously, we're going to be reaching out to the agencies across the state of Arizona. We'll be looking at targeting specific counties for different phase rollouts. So if you anticipate wanting to participate in this effort and you're not interested in waiting for Shayla and I to reach out to you directly, please feel free to reach out to us as soon as possible. Contact Shayla. She has her contact here, as well as myself. Reach out to either one of us with your interest to participate in this effort. And like I said, if we don't hear from you, you're going to be hearing from us at some point. So we'll be reaching out and trying to figure out a little bit more how we can get you on board with Justice Counts. We will be starting those phases coming up in Q4 of this calendar year. So quite a quick turnaround here, but Shayla and I will be reaching out to counties to negotiate that coming up starting, I guess, in October will be the earliest rollout. And again, I just want to stress from ACJC, your participation will make a big difference in this effort in Arizona, and trying to centralize valuable key performance indicators of the justice system so we can understand more about what's going on, not only in Arizona, but nationwide, and leveraging data from other states to inform us here in Arizona as well. And so I think it just can't be understated the importance of your participation in this effort. And then I just wanted to add our contacts. You have Andy's contact here as well. If you'd like to reach out to him with more questions or for information, you can also reach out to Shayla and I. We're more than happy to field any questions that you may have. I did provide the link to the CSG Justice Counts website location. If you want to learn more about Justice Counts, or if you want some additional questions answered there, it is a wealth of information on their website. The tier 1 metrics are probably much clearer than what we were able to provide here on this webinar today. So if you want to take a look at that a little bit more closely physically, then you can do so at their website as well. They have the metrics available there. And with that, anything else that I'm missing, Shayla, before we start opening it up for any questions or comments from the participants?
I don't think so. I pasted our emails in the chat as well as the Justice Counts URL, just so it might be easier for people to copy and paste that as well.
Perfect. Greatly appreciate it. And I think we're just a couple minutes early, so I think we have plenty of time for any questions or concerns. If anyone would like to go off mute, I think we have a small enough group here we can negotiate that. So if you have any questions, feel free to unmute and ask of the participants any questions you might have. Well, I guess we got the slide decks just right, because apparently all the information has been pretty clear to the group. So we can hang on for a couple more minutes. Again, if you have questions, we'll be on here for, let's say, another 5 minutes till 10:45. And then at this point, I just want to thank all of our participants. Thank you to Jeff and Sarah for jumping on. We really appreciate your participation and providing us the valuable information from the national perspective. And thank you to Shayla and to Mr. Lefevre as well, Director Lefevre, for providing his input here today. We really appreciate everybody jumping on here and making this a valuable webinar for everyone involved.
Hey, Matt, this is Andy. I had a question, if I could. I see Mr. Carline on. Brad, when Sheila was working on this as part of the national steering group, did she let APAC know, the council members know about what she was working on? And or I guess I'm curious if you guys were aware of the Justice Counts thing at your level.
Yeah, Andy, she did bring that up at times, and I believe when you made some presentations to the APAC board, you had mentioned this is coming. And of course, the initial legislation that we pushed back on, and other legislation such as requiring Yavapai and Pinal to track data, and then the subsequent legislation that brought to this has all been brought to our attention, either through APAC or through the Arizona Association of Counties.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Ms. Rudner, do you have a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I was just wondering if, now that you're partnering with Justice Counts, have any of the data elements that we discussed as part of the legislation for Senate Bill 1588 changed for the courts or for other agencies?
So we haven't necessarily done the close crosswalk at this point, not knowing what the legislation where it might have changed, where it might have evolved through that process. But I think it would be valuable for us to take a look at each of the justice sectors and see where we have some disparity, where we have some mirroring of the same information. I'm going to venture to guess that it's going to be very closely mirrored in most aspects. So we won't see much of a change there. The only areas might be in your fairness and equity calculations and aggregate data pulled there. But to your point, I don't think we're going to see very much variation between the two.
And if I just want to jump in, I put in the chat a link to our what we're calling our technical implementation guides, which give a lot more detail on what the various data elements are for each metric. So if you're interested in seeing, how those metrics can be defined by agencies and what the sort of potential breakdowns are, you would find those in the technical implementation guides on our website, which are also built into our publisher tool to allow everyone to do that sort of customization that I talked about.
Thank you, Sarah. Ms. Clarich, you have a question?
Yeah, Matt. Hi, this is Kathy with the AOC. You mentioned in the presentation today that you would be reaching out to the counties. You obviously you know that we hold the data for a lot of the counties here at the AOC. So does that mean you'll be coming to us for that county data on the court side? Or are you going to be going to them? Or what is your plan in terms of the court side in this data?
I think we would anticipate working directly with AOC where we can. If as you can imagine, if we get 1 or 2 counties under our belt, it's really just the continuing release of additional counties as they agree and volunteer to come on board. So I think working with AOC wherever we can would provide us the greatest benefit. If we have to go back to an agency that may not be hooked up with AOC, then we'll deal with that as it comes. But I think we've identified AOC as a strong partner in this effort.
Thank you.
And Matt, if I correct, your conversations with Director Byers was he recommended trying to do this on a county basis, not a state basis, correct?
That is correct. And it may involve continued work with AOC or direct contact with the county courts in that effort. That remains to be seen. I think we'll work with the counties, however they prefer that to be handled. And if they prefer to work with AOC, we can work directly with them too.
So Matt, have you already targeted what counties you're planning to pilot?
We do have 1 or 2 counties in mind for phase 1. We're actually looking to recruit more counties for ongoing phases beyond that. So if you know that your county might be interested in participating, again, let Shayla or I know. We'll be reaching out in the coming weeks to sort out which counties we might be able to roll into certain phases. Some may take longer than others to negotiate that amongst the agencies. But we're looking at trying to ramp up at least 2 of them at the current moment. And if there aren't any other questions or comments, we can go ahead and take it off record and effectively end the meeting, but we'll hang on for a couple more minutes just in case anybody has additional questions.